The morning of March 15th began like any other day at Heathrow Airport. Security officers moved through their routines with practiced ease. Passengers shuffled through lines. Coffee cups steamed in the hands of tired travelers. Nobody could have predicted that within hours, this ordinary Tuesday would become the most talked about day in British royal history since the abdication crisis of 1936. Camilla sat in the private royal lounge, her fingers wrapped around a cup of Earl Grey tea that had long gone cold. She stared out the window at the grey London sky, watching planes take off and disappear into the clouds. Her heart beat faster than usual. She told herself it was just the early morning. She told herself it was just travel anxiety. But, deep inside, she knew the truth. The weight in her carry-on bag was not just physical. It carried the burden of a decision she had made months ago, a decision that now felt like a terrible mistake. The Queen Consort of England was about to board a private flight to Jordan. The official story was simple enough. She was traveling to visit humanitarian projects, to shake hands with dignitaries, to represent the crown in matters of charitable importance. The press had been briefed. The photographers were ready. Everything appeared normal on the surface. But nothing about this trip was normal. 3 months earlier, Camilla had received a letter. It arrived not through official royal channels but through a private courier, hand-delivered to her personal assistant with instructions that it be given only to the Queen Consort herself. The envelope was plain. No return address. No royal seal. Just her name written in elegant script. Inside, she found a single page of handwritten text and a photograph that made her blood run cold. The letter was from a woman named Sarah Chen, a name Camilla had not heard in over 30 years. Sarah had been a young conservator at the Tower of London back in the 1990s, bright and ambitious, with a specialty in gemstone authentication. She and Camilla had crossed paths briefly during a private tour, back when Camilla was still just the woman having an affair with the Prince of Wales, back when her name was whispered in scandal rather than spoken in reverence. Sarah wrote that she was dying. Cancer had given her only months to live. And, before she left this world, she needed to clear her conscience about something she had discovered decades ago, something she had been paid handsomely to keep quiet. The photograph showed a necklace. Not just any necklace, but the Delhi Durbar necklace, one of the most magnificent pieces in the Crown Jewels collection. 9 emeralds set in diamonds, created for Queen Mary to wear at the Delhi Durbar of 1911. Worth millions. Irreplaceable. A symbol of empire and power. Except, according to Sarah Chen, the necklace currently sitting in the Tower of London was a fake. The real necklace, Sarah claimed, had been secretly replaced sometime in the 1980s. The genuine emeralds, some of the finest ever mined, had been removed and sold to private collectors across the world. What remained was an expert replica, beautiful enough to fool casual observers but ultimately worthless compared to the original. Sarah did not know who had orchestrated the switch. She did not know where the real emeralds had gone. But she knew one thing for certain. The authentication records had been falsified. She had been the one to falsify them, a young woman desperate for money, threatened by powerful people she never identified. She had carried this secret for 30 years, and now she wanted someone to know the truth before she died. Camilla read the letter 3 times before burning it in her fireplace. She told herself to forget it. She told herself it was probably the ravings of a dying woman seeking attention. She told herself that even if it were true, it was not her problem to solve. She was the Queen Consort now. She had duties. She had responsibilities. She could not go chasing conspiracy theories about stolen jewels. But the letter haunted her. Night after night, she lay awake thinking about it. She thought about the crown jewels, those glittering symbols of monarchy that millions of tourists came to see each year. She thought about what it would mean if the public discovered that some of them were fakes. The scandal would be unprecedented. The monarchy itself might not survive. And she thought about something else, something she had never told anyone. Camilla had her own secrets about the crown jewels. Long before she became Queen Consort, long before she even married Charles, Camilla had been shown things by people in the royal household. People who trusted her because they knew she would one day be important. People who wanted her loyalty. She had seen documents that suggested the royal family's relationship with certain pieces of jewelry was more complicated than the public understood. There were items listed in old inventories that no longer existed. There were gaps in the records that nobody could explain. There were whispers of jewels that had been sold quietly over the decades to fund various royal expenses, with replicas put in their place to maintain the illusion of continuity. Camilla had always assumed these were just rumors. Old palace gossip. The kind of stories that accumulated around any ancient institution. But Sarah Chen's letter made her wonder if the rumors were true. She began to investigate quietly. Using her position, she arranged private viewings of certain pieces. She asked questions that made the tower officials uncomfortable. She requested to see authentication records going back decades. Each answer she received only raised more questions. And then, she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the archives of the royal household, buried in a file that had not been opened in 40 years, Camilla found a letter. It was written by a member of the royal family, someone long dead, someone whose name she could not bring herself to write down even in her private notes. The letter discussed a necessary arrangement regarding certain Indian jewels that needed to be preserved from potential complications. The language was vague, deliberately so. But Camilla understood what it meant. Sometime in the past, someone in the royal family had authorized the removal and sale of genuine stones from the crown jewels. The money had gone somewhere. The records had been destroyed. And the secret had been kept for generations. Camilla faced a terrible choice. She could reveal the truth and destroy the monarchy she had worked so hard to be part of. She could expose the lies and watch everything crumble. Charles would be humiliated. The institution would be shattered. Her own legacy would be one of destruction rather than service. Or she could do something else. The idea came to her slowly, taking shape over weeks of sleepless nights. What if she could fix it? What if she could secretly recover the original emeralds and restore them to the crown jewels without anyone knowing they had ever been missing? What if she could undo the crimes of the past and protect the monarchy at the same time? It was a mad idea. It was dangerous and possibly illegal. But Camilla was not a woman who shied away from difficulty. She had spent decades fighting for her place in the royal family. She had endured public hatred and private betrayal. She had clawed her way from disgraced mistress to queen consort. If anyone could pull off the impossible, she believed it was her. She began making plans. Using her network of contacts, Camilla quietly traced the path of the original emeralds. They had been sold through a series of intermediaries, changing hands multiple times over the years. Most had ended up in private collections in the Middle East, owned by wealthy families who had no idea of the stone's true provenance. Through careful negotiation, using her own private funds and calling in favors accumulated over a lifetime, Camilla managed to purchase 3 of the 9 emeralds. The sellers asked no questions. They were happy to profit from the transaction. They did not know they were selling pieces of the British crown jewels back to the British Queen. Getting the emeralds back to England was another matter. Camilla could not declare them through official channels. She could not explain where they came from or why she had them. Any paper trail would lead to questions she could not answer. So she decided to carry them herself, hidden in her luggage, smuggled through airports like a common criminal. The irony was not lost on her. The Queen Consort of England, smuggling jewels. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But Camilla saw no other way. She told herself it was not really smuggling if the jewels belonged to the crown in the first place. She told herself she was correcting an old wrong, not committing a new one. She told herself that the ends justified the means. 3 trips. 3 successful crossings. 3 emeralds hidden in secret compartments sewn into her luggage by a trusted dresser who asked no questions. Each time, Camilla passed through security with her heart pounding, expecting at any moment to be stopped. Each time, she made it through undetected. The 4th trip was supposed to be the same. On this March morning, Camilla carried 2 more emeralds in her bag. 2 more pieces of history, 2 more fragments of the original necklace, ready to be restored to their rightful place. After this trip, she would have 5 of the 9. More than half. Enough to make a difference. She finished her cold tea and stood up. Her assistant appeared at her elbow, ready to escort her to the plane. Security personnel moved into position. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Except that someone had talked. Somewhere in the chain of transactions, someone had become suspicious. Someone had asked the wrong questions and received the right answers. Someone had figured out that the Queen Consort of England was secretly buying emeralds with a very specific provenance. And that someone had made a phone call. As Camilla walked toward the security checkpoint, she noticed something unusual. There were more guards than normal. They stood too stiffly. They watched her too carefully. One of them whispered into a radio. Her instincts, honed by decades of public scrutiny, told her something was wrong. She considered turning back. She considered abandoning the plan, leaving the emerald somewhere, claiming innocence. But it was too late. She was already inside the security zone. Cameras were watching. People were waiting. The head of airport security approached her. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes that looked genuinely apologetic. He introduced himself. He explained that there had been a tip. He expressed his deep regret. He asked, with painful politeness, if he might inspect her luggage. Camilla felt the world slow down around her. She could refuse. She could invoke royal privilege. She could make phone calls and have people fired. She had power. She had authority. She could probably make this entire situation disappear. But she also knew that refusing would only delay the inevitable. Whoever had made the phone call knew what she was carrying. If she refused today, they would try again tomorrow. The secret was out. The only question now was how the story would end. She thought about Charles. She thought about what this would do to him, to their marriage, to the monarchy. She thought about all the years she had spent fighting to be accepted, to be respected, to be loved. All of that was about to be destroyed. But she also thought about the emeralds. She thought about the crimes of the past. She thought about the lies that had been told for generations. Maybe it was time for the truth to come out. Maybe the monarchy needed to face its history, however painful that might be. Camilla took a deep breath. She looked at the security officer with the kind eyes. She saw the cameras pointing at her. She felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. And then, she made a choice that would change everything. She opened her bag. Inside, nestled in a hidden compartment lined with velvet, lay 2 emeralds the size of robin's eggs. They caught the airport lights and glowed with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. They were beautiful. They were ancient. They were stolen. The security officer stared at them for a long moment. His face went pale. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his radio. Within minutes, the airport descended into chaos. Across London, phones began to ring. At Buckingham Palace, aides rushed to wake the king. At newspaper offices, editors scrambled to confirm the impossible story coming across their wires. On social media, the first rumors began to spread, wild and uncontrolled. The Queen Consort of England had been caught smuggling jewels at Heathrow Airport. The royal scandal of the century had begun. But what nobody knew yet, what the breathless news reports could not explain, was why. What had driven Camilla to such desperate action? What secret was she trying to protect or expose? What truth lay hidden in the glittering depths of those ancient emeralds? The answers would take months to emerge. They would tear apart families and destroy careers. They would force the British monarchy to confront sins that had been buried for generations. They would make people question everything they thought they knew about the institution they had trusted for centuries. And, at the center of it all stood Camilla, alone in a private room at Heathrow Airport, watching her world collapse around her, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. She had gambled everything on a mad plan to save the monarchy. And she had lost. Or had she? As she sat in that cold room, waiting for the lawyers and the officials and the explanations, Camilla allowed herself a small, secret smile. Because she knew something that nobody else knew yet. She knew that the discovery of the emeralds was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The truth about the crown jewels was about to come out. The lies that had been told for decades were about to be exposed. And, whatever happened next, whatever punishment awaited her, Camilla knew that she had done what she believed was right. She had forced the monarchy to face its past. Now she would have to live with the consequences. In the hours that followed, as the news spread around the world and millions of people watched in disbelief, Camilla remained calm. She answered questions. She made statements. She refused to apologize for what she had done. And, slowly, piece by piece, she began to tell her story. The story of Sarah Chan and the dying letter. The story of the secret archives and the hidden crimes. The story of emeralds sold and replaced, of records falsified and truths buried. The story of a queen who had tried to save her kingdom and had ended up exposing its darkest secrets. It was a story that would take many more days to tell. It was a story that would change the monarchy forever. It was a story that would force an entire nation to ask itself what it truly valued and what it was willing to forgive. But, on that first day, in that first moment, as the cameras flashed and the questions flew, there was only Camilla. A woman alone. A queen in disgrace. And 2 emeralds that contained the power to destroy or redeem everything she had ever loved. The scandal had exploded. And nothing would ever be the same again. The hours after the discovery moved with strange speed and terrible slowness at the same time. Camilla was escorted from the security checkpoint to a private room deep within the airport. The room was small and plain, with white walls and uncomfortable chairs and a table that had seen countless difficult conversations. It smelled of coffee and fear. 2 police officers stood by the door. They did not speak. They did not meet her eyes. They had been trained to treat everyone the same, regardless of status, but training could not prepare them for guarding the Queen Consort of England. A lawyer arrived within the hour. Then, another lawyer. Then, a palace official whose face was so pale he looked like he might faint. They whispered among themselves. They made phone calls. They looked at Camilla with expressions that mixed horror and confusion. Nobody knew what to do. There was no protocol for this. There was no manual that explained how to handle a situation where the wife of the king was caught smuggling at an airport. The lawyers debated jurisdiction. The officials argued about publicity. Everyone waited for instructions from Buckingham Palace, but Buckingham Palace was in chaos. Charles had been woken from sleep to receive the news. His first reaction, according to those present, was disbelief. His second reaction was anger. His third reaction was something that looked very much like fear. He demanded to speak with Camilla. The request was denied. She was technically under investigation. Contact could be seen as interference. The lawyers insisted on following procedure, even if the procedure made no sense in a situation this unprecedented. Charles threw a chair across the room. This detail would leak to the press months later, becoming one of the most discussed moments of the entire scandal. The King of England, losing control, expressing his rage and helplessness in a single violent gesture. It humanized him in a way that years of careful public relations never had. But, in that moment, alone in his study, Charles felt only despair. He had spent his entire life preparing for the crown. He had waited longer than any heir in British history. He had endured scandal after scandal, from his failed first marriage to his controversial opinions to the accusations that had swirled around various family members over the years. Through it all, he had held on to the belief that he could make the monarchy mean something, that he could use his position to do good in the world. And, now his wife was sitting in a police holding room at Heathrow Airport, accused of smuggling stolen jewels. The irony was too bitter to contemplate. Across the world, the news exploded like a bomb. Within 2 hours of the discovery, every major news network was running the story. Social media erupted with speculation, jokes, conspiracy theories. Hashtags trended. Memes spread. The British royal family became the subject of global mockery and fascination. But, alongside the mockery came questions. Why would the Queen consort smuggle jewels? Where had the emeralds come from? What was she planning to do with them? The questions multiplied faster than anyone could answer them. Journalists began digging. Private investigators were hired. Old records were examined. People who had not thought about Sarah Chin in decades suddenly found reporters on their doorsteps. The machine of modern media, hungry and relentless, turned its full attention to the mystery at the heart of the British monarchy. And, slowly, the truth began to emerge. The first breakthrough came from a retired insurance investigator named Malcolm Price. He had spent 40 years examining claims involving jewelry, art, and other valuable items. He had seen every kind of fraud imaginable. And he had always harbored suspicions about certain pieces in the crown jewels. Malcolm had kept files. Detailed files. Files that documented inconsistencies in authentication records, questions about provenance, rumors of sales that had never been officially acknowledged. He had tried to raise these concerns during his career and had been quietly pressured to drop them. Now, with the Camilla scandal dominating the news, Malcolm decided to go public. His interview with the BBC was watched by 30 million people. He spoke calmly and, methodically, presenting evidence that suggested the crown jewels had been compromised for decades. He did not accuse anyone specifically. He simply laid out the facts and let viewers draw their own conclusions. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Calls for investigation poured in from every corner of British society. Members of Parliament demanded answers. Historians voiced long-suppressed doubts. Former employees of the Tower of London came forward with their own stories of irregularities and cover-ups. What had started as a scandal about one woman's desperate actions became something much larger. It became a reckoning with the entire institution of the monarchy, its history, its secrets, its relationship with the public it claimed to serve. In her holding room at the airport, Camilla watched it all unfold on a small television mounted to the wall. She watched Malcolm Price reveal secrets she had only recently discovered herself. She watched historians connect dots she had spent months trying to connect. She watched the truth emerge, piece by piece, exactly as she had hoped it would. Because this was her plan all along. Camilla had known she would probably be caught. She had prepared for it. She had arranged for certain documents to be found after her arrest. She had made sure that people like Malcolm Price would feel emboldened to speak. She had set the stage for a revelation that went far beyond her own actions. The smuggling was never really about recovering the emeralds. It was about forcing the truth into the open. Camilla had realized months ago that she could never fix the problem secretly. There were too many missing stones, too many falsified records, too many people involved in the cover-up. Any attempt to restore the crown jewels quietly would fail. The only way to truly address the problem was to expose it publicly, to force the monarchy to acknowledge its past and make amends. But she could not simply announce what she had discovered. Nobody would believe her. She had no proof that could not be dismissed as forgery. She had no witnesses who would not be discredited. The machinery of royal protection would crush any accusation she made. So she had devised a different strategy. By smuggling the emeralds herself, by getting caught, by creating an undeniable scandal, Camilla had guaranteed that investigators would dig deep. They would uncover the truth she could not prove alone. They would follow the trail she had prepared for them. They would expose crimes that had been hidden for generations. It was a sacrifice play. Her reputation, her freedom, her marriage, all of it traded for the chance to force a reckoning that was long overdue. Whether it was brave or foolish, noble or destructive, would be debated for years to come. But, in that moment, watching the television in her holding room, Camilla felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt free. The lies were ending. The truth was emerging. Whatever happened next, at least it would be real. The first day ended with Camilla still in custody. No charges had been filed. No decisions had been made. The palace was in lockdown. The king was in seclusion. The world was watching and waiting. Outside Heathrow Airport, crowds had gathered. Some were protesters, angry at what they saw as royal privilege being exposed. Some were supporters, holding signs that defended the Queen Consort for reasons they could not yet explain. Some were simply curious, drawn by the gravity of the moment, wanting to witness history in the making. In the morning, they would have answers. But, on that first night, there was only uncertainty. And, in a small white room, behind locked doors and watchful guards, the woman who had started it all sat alone with her thoughts. She did not sleep. She did not cry. She simply waited for whatever came next. The scandal had exploded. And, the world would never see the British monarchy the same way again. The second day brought chaos to Buckingham Palace unlike anything the ancient institution had experienced in living memory. Staff arrived at dawn to find their routines shattered, their assumptions destroyed, their loyalty tested in ways they had never imagined. The corridors that normally hummed with quiet efficiency now buzzed with whispered conversations and barely contained panic. King Charles had not slept. He had spent the night in his private study, surrounded by advisors who rotated in and out like soldiers on a battlefield. Legal experts. Communication specialists. Historians hastily summoned from universities across the country. Each brought opinions. Each brought warnings. None brought solutions. The problem was unprecedented because the crime itself was unprecedented. Or rather, the crimes. Because as the night wore on, as the investigations began, as journalists dug and witnesses emerged, it became clear that what Camilla had been caught doing was only the surface of something much deeper and much older. Charles sat behind his desk as the morning light crept through the windows. His face was gray with exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the documents his advisors had prepared overnight. Each page contained revelations that felt like physical blows. The crown jewels, those glittering symbols of British sovereignty, had been compromised for decades. Perhaps longer. The evidence was mounting with every passing hour. Authentication records that did not match. Insurance documents with suspicious gaps. Testimonies from former employees who had been paid to stay silent. And, at the center of it all was his wife. Charles had married Camilla believing he knew her completely. Their relationship had been forged in scandal already. They had survived the Diana years, the public hatred, the whispered accusations. They had emerged on the other side as partners, as friends, as two people who understood each other in ways that nobody else could. Or so he had thought. Now he wondered if he had ever really known her at all. The question that tortured him was not about the emeralds. It was not about the smuggling or the potential criminal charges. It was much simpler and much more painful. Why had she not told him? If Camilla had discovered something wrong with the crown jewels, why had she not come to him? If she believed crimes had been committed, why had she not trusted him to help address them? Why had she chosen to act alone, risking everything, without giving him the chance to stand beside her? The answer, when it finally came, would break his heart. But that answer was still hours away. For now, Charles had to deal with the immediate crisis. The Prime Minister was demanding a meeting. Parliament was calling for statements. Foreign governments were requesting clarification. The entire machinery of British governance had ground to a halt while everyone waited to see what would happen next. And, hovering over everything was the press. Reporters had descended on London like locusts. They camped outside Buckingham Palace. They staked out Heathrow Airport. They tracked down anyone who had ever worked for the royal family and offered money for information. The hunger for details was insatiable. The palace communications team worked through the night preparing statements, but every statement raised more questions than it answered. How do you explain something when you do not yet understand it yourself? How do you defend an institution when the very foundations of that institution are being questioned? The press secretary, a veteran of countless royal crises, described it later as trying to bail out a sinking ship while the ship was also on fire and surrounded by sharks. Every solution created new problems. Every explanation required further explanation. Every attempt at damage control somehow made the damage worse. By noon, the hashtag British Crown scandal was trending in 40 countries. Memes depicting Camilla in various smuggling scenarios flooded social media. Late-night comedians in America were preparing material. The British monarchy had become a global joke overnight. But, beneath the jokes lay something more serious. People were genuinely angry. The crown jewels belonged to the nation, held in trust by the monarchy. If those jewels had been sold, replaced with fakes, and the deception hidden for decades, that was not just a scandal. That was theft from the British people themselves. Protesters gathered outside the Tower of London, demanding that the crown jewels be examined by independent experts. Similar protests formed in Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Belfast. The United Kingdom, already stressed by years of political division, now had a new source of outrage to unite around. Inside the tower, the jewel house remained closed to visitors for the first time in decades. Security had been tripled. Experts were being assembled to conduct a comprehensive audit of every piece in the collection. The process would take months, but the first preliminary results were due within days. Everyone held their breath. In her private room at Heathrow, Camilla received visitors for the first time since her arrest. Her lawyer came first, bringing news of the charges being considered. Smuggling. Handling stolen property. Potentially conspiracy to commit fraud. The list was long and growing longer. Then came the palace representative, a formal woman in a formal suit who delivered a formal message. The king wished it to be known that he was deeply concerned about the situation. The king wished it to be known that he supported the rule of law. The king wished it to be known that no decisions about the future had been made. The message contained no warmth. No personal words. No hint of the relationship that had defined both their lives for decades. Camilla understood what it meant. Charles was distancing himself. He was preparing for the possibility that she would be prosecuted, convicted, disgraced. He was protecting the monarchy in the only way he knew how, by making clear that her actions were hers alone. She did not blame him. This was exactly what she had expected. It was, in fact, what she had planned for. When she decided to force this crisis, she knew that Charles would have to choose between her and the crown. She knew which choice he would make. She knew because she would have made the same choice herself. Some things were bigger than marriage. Some duties were older than love. But, knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. When the palace representative left, when the door closed and she was alone again, Camilla allowed herself a few minutes of grief. She thought about the life she was losing. The husband she might never be truly close to again. The position she had worked so hard to earn. Then, she dried her eyes and prepared for what came next. There was still work to do. The next visitor was someone the palace had not sent. Someone who had found his own way to the airport, talked his way past security, and insisted on seeing the Queen Consort regardless of protocol. His name was William, and he was the heir to the throne. William arrived looking like he had not slept in days. His normally careful appearance was disheveled, his jaw tight with tension, his eyes burning with questions he clearly needed answered. He sat down across from Camilla without greeting her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Their relationship had always been complicated. William had loved his mother Diana with a fierce devotion that made accepting Camilla difficult. Over the years, they had found a working peace, a mutual respect built on shared duty and careful boundaries. But they had never been truly close. Now those careful boundaries were meaningless. William spoke first. His voice was controlled but barely. He asked a single question. "Did you know?" Camilla understood what he was really asking. Did she know about the crown jewels before she started her investigation? Was she involved in the original crimes? Had she been complicit in decades of deception? she answered honestly. No. She had known nothing until Sarah Chen's letter arrived. Everything she discovered afterward came as a shock to her, just as it was shocking everyone else now. William studied her face, looking for signs of deception. He had been trained from birth to read people, to separate truth from flattery. He brought all of that training to bear now. After a long moment, he nodded. He believed her. But he had more questions. Why had she acted alone? Why had she not come to him, or to his father, or to anyone in the family? Why had she chosen the most destructive possible path? Camilla explained. She told William about the documents she had found, the ones that suggested someone in the royal family had authorized the original theft. She did not name names. She did not need to. William understood immediately who she was talking about. The implications were staggering. If those documents became public, they would destroy more than just reputations. They would shatter the mythology that the royal family had carefully constructed over centuries. They would prove that the institution itself, not just individual members, was capable of serious crime. Camilla explained her reasoning. If she had brought this information to the family, it would have been buried. Lawyers would have found ways to suppress it. Public relations experts would have spun it away. The truth would have remained hidden, as it had been hidden for decades. The only way to force real accountability was to make the scandal so big that it could not be controlled. By getting caught smuggling, by creating a crisis that attracted global attention, Camilla had ensured that investigators would dig deep enough to find everything, including the worst secrets of all. William listened without interrupting. His face cycled through emotions that he struggled to control. Anger. Confusion. Something that might have been grudging respect. When Camilla finished, William asked one more question. What happens now? Camilla did not have a certain answer. She could only tell him what she hoped would happen. She hoped that the investigation would uncover the full truth. She hoped that the monarchy would be forced to acknowledge its mistakes, make restitution, begin the long process of rebuilding trust. She hoped that something good would come from the wreckage she had created. But she also knew that hope was not a plan. Things could go badly wrong. The truth might be too damaging. The public might not forgive. The monarchy itself might not survive. William stood up to leave. At the door, he paused. He looked back at the woman who had once been his enemy, then his stepmother, and now something else entirely. A revolutionary in royal clothing. A destroyer who believed she was a savior. He did not thank her. He did not condemn her. He simply nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged the magnitude of what she had done, and then he was gone. Camilla sat alone in the silence he left behind. She wondered if she had just had her last real conversation with a member of the royal family. Outside the airport, the world continued to spin. In newsrooms across Britain, editors made difficult decisions about how to cover the story. Some chose to focus on the scandal, the smuggling, the personal drama of a queen caught breaking the law. Others chose to dig deeper, following the threads that Malcolm Price had identified, searching for evidence of the larger crimes that Camilla's actions had exposed. The serious journalists found serious things. A team from The Guardian tracked down Sarah Chen's family. Sarah had died 3 weeks before Camilla's arrest, just as she had predicted. But she had left behind more than a letter. She had left boxes of documents, copies of authentication records, photographs of the crown jewels taken with hidden cameras 30 years ago. Her family had been afraid to come forward. They feared retaliation from powerful forces they did not understand. But, with the scandal already public, they decided that Sarah's truth deserved to be told. The documents they provided were explosive. They showed clear evidence that the Delhi Durbar necklace had been altered in 1985. They identified the gemstone dealer who had brokered the sale of the original emeralds. They included correspondence that suggested the authorization had come from someone with enough authority to override normal procedures at the Tower of London. The correspondence did not name the authorizer directly. But it contained enough details that investigators could narrow down the possibilities to a very short list. A list that included only members of the royal family. The Guardian published its findings on the afternoon of the second day. Within hours, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet in the world. What had been a scandal about one woman smuggling became a scandal about institutional corruption at the highest levels. Parliament erupted. Members demanded an emergency debate. They demanded a full public inquiry. They demanded that the royal family be stripped of its remaining constitutional powers until the investigation was complete. The anger crossed party lines. Conservatives and Labour united in their outrage. The Prime Minister, caught between loyalty to the Crown and pressure from the public, walked a tightrope in her statements. She expressed confidence in the integrity of the monarchy while also supporting the need for transparency. It was a difficult balance that satisfied no one. At Buckingham Palace, the crisis deepened. Charles gathered his family for an emergency meeting. William and Kate arrived looking shell-shocked. Harry joined by video call from America, his face a mixture of vindication and horror. The younger royals sat in stunned silence as the adults argued about what to do. The family was divided. Some wanted to fight. They believed the documents were forgeries, the accusations were lies, and the monarchy would be destroyed if it showed weakness. They urged Charles to deny everything, to use every legal tool available to suppress the investigation, to treat the whole affair as an attack on the institution itself. Others wanted to confess. They believed the evidence was too strong to deny, the public mood was too hostile to fight, and the only way to save the monarchy was radical honesty. They urged Charles to get ahead of the story, acknowledge past wrongs, and promise reform. Charles listened to both sides. He asked questions. He demanded details. He tried to understand the full scope of what his family faced. And, slowly, reluctantly, he began to form a decision. That night, he asked to speak with Camilla. The request required delicate negotiation. She was still technically under investigation. Any communication could be seen as inappropriate. But Charles was the King of England, and some protocols could be bent when necessary. They spoke by video call, watched by lawyers on both sides. The conversation was formal at first. Charles asked about her well-being. Camilla assured him she was being treated appropriately. They exchanged pleasantries that meant nothing and avoided the subjects that meant everything. Then, Charles dismissed everyone except his most trusted advisor. Camilla did the same. The lawyers protested but complied. Alone at last, husband and wife looked at each other through screens. Charles asked the question that had been tormenting him. "Why did you not tell me?" Camilla's answer came slowly, painfully, each word chosen with care. She explained that she had not trusted him to do what was necessary. She had feared that his loyalty to the institution would outweigh his commitment to truth. She had worried that if she told him, he would try to stop her, and the opportunity to force change would be lost. It was not that she did not love him. She loved him more than she had ever loved anyone. But she had learned something in her years of fighting for her place in the royal family. She had learned that the institution could corrupt even the best people. It could make them prioritize reputation over righteousness, stability over justice. She had seen it happen to others. She had feared it would happen to her if she waited too long. So she had acted while she still had the courage to act. Charles listened with tears streaming down his face. He understood what she was saying. He even understood why she had kept him in the dark. But understanding did not ease the pain. She had chosen truth over their marriage. She had decided that saving the monarchy was more important than saving their relationship. And the worst part was, he could not say she was wrong. Charles made a decision in that moment. A decision that would define his reign and, potentially, save his kingdom. He would support the investigation. He would cooperate fully with authorities. He would order the release of all relevant palace documents. He would break the pattern of secrecy that had protected the royal family for so long. And he would stand by his wife. Not publicly, not immediately, but in his heart. He chose to believe that she had done a brave thing for reasons she believed were right. He chose to see her sacrifice as an act of love for an institution they both served. He chose to forgive her for the betrayal, even if the forgiveness took years to fully express. When the call ended, both of them were crying. They did not know when they would see each other again. They did not know what the investigation would find or what the consequences would be. They did not know if the monarchy would survive or if their marriage would weather the storm. But they knew that whatever happened, they would face it with honesty. The lies were over. The reckoning had begun. The second day ended with more questions than answers. But something fundamental had shifted. The royal family, for the first time in living memory, had chosen transparency over protection. The investigation would proceed without interference. The truth would emerge, however painful it might be. In her room at the airport, Camilla finally allowed herself to sleep. She dreamed of emeralds falling like rain. She dreamed of crowns crumbling to dust. She dreamed of a new beginning rising from the ashes of the old. And, somewhere, in the quiet hours before dawn, she smiled. The days that followed brought a flood of revelations that stunned the nation. Investigators began their comprehensive audit of the crown jewels. They worked in teams, comparing each piece against historical records, testing materials, examining craftsmanship. The process was painstaking and slow. But the preliminary results confirmed the worst fears. Of the major pieces examined, 17 showed evidence of alteration. Stones had been replaced. Settings had been modified. Documentation had been falsified. The extent of the compromise was far greater than anyone had imagined. The Delhi Durbar necklace was only the beginning. Researchers discovered that similar substitutions had been made to other significant items. Diamonds from a historic tiara had been swapped for high-quality glass. Rubies from an ancient brooch had been replaced with synthetic stones. Gold settings had been secretly reinforced with cheaper alloys. Each discovery made headlines. Each headline made the scandal worse. The public demanded to know who was responsible. The investigation widened to include examination of financial records, property transactions, and banking histories going back 50 years. Forensic accountants joined the team. Intelligence services provided support. And, gradually, the picture became clear. The original scheme had begun in the early 1980s, during a period of significant financial pressure on the royal household. Renovations were needed. Security upgrades were required. Expenses were rising while public funding remained static. Someone had found an innovative solution to the budget problem. The crown jewels represented enormous value, but that value could not be accessed normally. The jewels belonged to the nation, held in trust, untouchable. Or so the public believed. But trust, it turned out, could be betrayed. A small group within the royal household had devised a scheme. They would secretly replace the most valuable stones with expertly crafted replicas. They would sell the originals through networks of discreet dealers. They would use the proceeds to fund whatever needs the palace had. The scheme required cooperation from multiple people. Jewelers who would create the replicas. Dealers who would find buyers. Guards who would look the other way. Archivists who would falsify records. Each person received payment for their silence. Each believed they were serving a greater good. The scheme worked for years. Perhaps it would have worked forever if not for one young conservator who noticed something wrong and could not live with the knowledge. Sarah Chen had discovered the truth by accident. She had been examining the Delhi Durbar necklace for routine conservation when she noticed microscopic marks that should not have been there. Her suspicions led to careful investigation, which led to terrifying knowledge. When she tried to report her findings, she was warned. Powerful people made it clear that her career, her reputation, and possibly her safety depended on her silence. They offered her money to forget what she had seen. They threatened her with consequences if she refused. Sarah was young and frightened. She took the money. She signed the papers. She kept the secret for 30 years. But she never forgot. As death approached, her conscience demanded action. She had no proof that could be presented in court. Too much time had passed. Too many witnesses were dead. But she could still plant seeds of truth that might one day grow. Her letter to Camilla was her final act of courage. She chose Camilla specifically because she believed the queen consort was different from others in the royal family. Camilla had fought her way into the institution from outside. She understood what it meant to be an outsider, to be judged unfairly, to be denied the truth. Sarah hoped that Camilla would have the strength to do what Sarah herself had been unable to do. Her hope was vindicated. The investigation eventually traced responsibility for the original scheme to its source. The evidence pointed clearly, unavoidably, to decisions made at the highest levels of the royal household. Not the current king. Not his sons. But those who came before them. The implications were devastating. The monarchy had always presented itself as a symbol of stability, tradition, and trust. Now the public learned that behind that symbol lay decades of deception. The very jewels that tourists queued for hours to see, that represented the continuity of British sovereignty, had been quietly sold to fund private conveniences. It was a betrayal that went to the heart of what the monarchy claimed to represent. Public reaction was fierce and divided. Many called for the abolition of the monarchy entirely. They argued that an institution capable of such systematic deception did not deserve public support. Petitions circulated. Protests grew. Republican sentiment, long a minority position in Britain, suddenly found mainstream expression. Others defended the institution while condemning the individuals responsible. They argued that the crimes of past generations should not destroy something that still served valuable purposes. They called for reform rather than abolition. They urged patience while justice took its course. Charles watched it all from Buckingham Palace, knowing that his response would determine whether the monarchy survived. He chose a path that surprised everyone. In a televised address broadcast worldwide, the king acknowledged the truth. He admitted that members of the royal family had committed serious crimes. He apologized to the British people for the breach of trust. He announced that the monarchy would cooperate fully with all investigations and would accept whatever consequences the law required. Then, he went further. He announced a comprehensive reform of the royal household. All finances would be made public. All properties would be inventoried. All practices would be reviewed by independent auditors. The culture of secrecy that had enabled the crimes would be dismantled. He announced the establishment of a compensation fund for any losses the nation had suffered. The royal family would contribute personal funds to make restitution. And he announced something that stunned the world. He announced that Camilla, despite her criminal charges, had acted out of genuine concern for the monarchy's integrity. He described her as a whistleblower who had used unconventional means to expose wrongdoing that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. He asked the British people to consider her actions in that light. It was the most extraordinary royal address in modern history. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Some praised Charles for his honesty and courage. Others condemned him for defending a criminal. The debate raged across newspapers, television programs, and social media platforms. But something had shifted. The monarchy was no longer simply defending itself. It was engaging in genuine accountability. It was treating the public as partners rather than subjects. It was demonstrating the kind of transparency that modern citizens expected from their institutions. Whether this would be enough to save the crown remained to be seen. But, for the first time since the scandal broke, there was a path forward that did not lead inevitably to destruction. In her holding room, which had become a more comfortable suite as days passed, Camilla watched the king's address with tears in her eyes. Charles had chosen to stand by her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal of trust, despite the damage to his reign, he had chosen to recognize the justice of what she had tried to do. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The legal proceedings continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Prosecutors faced the difficult question of how to charge someone who had technically committed crimes but had done so to expose much larger crimes. Public opinion polls showed growing support for leniency. The lawyers argued. The experts debated. The system struggled to process a case that had no precedent. And, while the world waited for resolution, the real work of reform began. The crown jewels were being carefully restored. Experts from around the world contributed to the effort. The original stones that Camilla had recovered were returned to their proper settings. Others were traced and negotiated for. The process would take years, but the commitment was clear. The monarchy was being rebuilt. Not the same as before. Never the same. But perhaps something better. Something that had faced its worst secrets and survived. Something that had learned the cost of deception and chosen a different path. Something that might deserve the trust it asked the public to give. The second day of the scandal had brought chaos. The days that followed had brought reckoning. But, hidden within the reckoning was the possibility of redemption. And, that possibility, fragile as it was, gave everyone something to hold on to as the crisis continued to unfold. The courthouse stood like a fortress of grey stone against the London sky, its Victorian architecture speaking of permanence and tradition in a world that seemed to change faster each day. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, crowds gathered behind metal barriers, their faces a mosaic of emotions ranging from anger to sympathy to simple curiosity. They had come to witness history, to see a queen face judgment for crimes that had shaken a nation. Camilla arrived in an unmarked vehicle, her entrance carefully choreographed to minimize spectacle while acknowledging the gravity of the moment. She wore simple clothes, understated jewelry, nothing that spoke of royal privilege. Her lawyers had advised her to present herself as a citizen facing the law like any other citizen, though everyone knew that nothing about this case was ordinary. She walked into the courthouse with her head held high, meeting the eyes of those who watched. Some shouted insults. Some called words of encouragement. Most simply stared, trying to reconcile the woman before them with the scandal that bore her name. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Journalists occupied every available seat. Cameras were positioned to capture every expression, every gesture, every moment of drama. The judge entered and called the proceedings to order, and, for a moment, silence fell over the assembled crowd. The charges were read aloud. Smuggling of cultural artifacts. Possession of stolen property. Conspiracy to evade customs regulations. Each charge carried potential prison sentences. Each charge represented a formal accusation against a woman who had stood beside the King of England. Camilla listened without visible emotion. She had prepared herself for this moment over many sleepless nights. She had accepted that whatever happened, she would face it with dignity. The truth had been exposed. The monarchy was reforming. Whatever price she had to pay was worth the result. Her legal team presented their defense. They argued that Camilla had not smuggled stolen property but had attempted to return rightfully owned items to their proper place. They argued that the emeralds belonged to the crown, that Camilla acted in her capacity as queen consort to protect national treasures, that her methods, though unconventional, served legitimate purposes. The prosecutor countered that good intentions did not excuse criminal methods. The law applied equally to everyone, regardless of title or position. Allowing the queen consort to escape punishment would send a message that the powerful could break rules when they believed their cause was just. Both arguments had merit. Both sides had compelling points. The judge listened carefully, asking questions that revealed the complexity of the legal territory they were navigating. The hearing lasted 3 days. During those days, witnesses testified about the history of the crown jewels scandal. Experts explained the authentication processes that had failed. Former palace employees described the culture of secrecy that had enabled decades of deception. The courtroom became a classroom, educating the public about crimes they had never known were committed. Camilla herself testified on the second day. She spoke for nearly 4 hours, telling her story from the beginning. The letter from Sarah Chen. The investigation she conducted in secret. The documents she found in the palace archives. the terrible decision she faced when she realized the scope of what had been done. She explained why she chose to act alone. She described her fear that traditional channels would suppress the truth rather than reveal it. She acknowledged that she had broken laws in pursuit of justice, and she expressed genuine remorse for the position she had put her husband and the nation in. But she did not apologize for forcing the scandal into the open. She believed, she said, that the British people deserved to know the truth about their national treasures. She believed that accountability, however painful, was better than continued deception. She believed that the monarchy could only survive if it earned public trust through honesty rather than demanding it through tradition. Her testimony moved many who watched it. Even those who believed she should be punished acknowledged the moral complexity of her situation. The woman in the witness stand was not a common criminal. She was someone who had faced an impossible choice and chosen the path she believed was right. The third day brought closing arguments. The prosecution made its case methodically, emphasizing the rule of law, the importance of equal treatment, the dangers of allowing anyone to place themselves above the legal system. The defense responded with emotional appeals to justice, context, and the extraordinary circumstances that had driven Camilla's actions. When the arguments ended, the judge announced that he would need time to consider the evidence and would deliver his ruling in 1 week. The crowd dispersed. The journalists filed their stories. Camilla returned to the suite that had become her temporary home, somewhere between prison and palace, neither fully free nor fully confined. The week of waiting was agony for everyone involved. At Buckingham Palace, Charles struggled to maintain normalcy while the fate of his wife hung in the balance. He continued his official duties, attending ceremonies and signing documents, but those close to him noticed the strain in his eyes. He had chosen to support Camilla publicly, and now he waited to see what that support would cost. William and Kate visited him several times during the week, bringing news and offering comfort. The relationship between William and his stepmother had transformed during the crisis. The young prince had developed a grudging respect for Camilla's courage, even as he remained troubled by the upheaval she had caused. He recognized that her actions, whatever their legality, had forced changes that were probably necessary. Harry, watching from America, experienced the crisis differently. For years, he had complained about the institutional dysfunction of the royal family. Now that dysfunction was being exposed for all to see, and he felt vindicated but also sad. The family he had left was being torn apart, and, despite everything, part of him wished he could help. The tabloids filled the waiting week with speculation and analysis. Opinion writers argued about justice and privilege. Television hosts debated the meaning of monarchy in the modern age. Social media buzzed with hashtags and memes that ranged from supportive to vicious. Camilla spent the week in quiet contemplation. She read letters from members of the public, thousands of them, that had been forwarded to her by her legal team. Some letters condemned her as a criminal who deserved prison. Others praised her as a hero who had risked everything for truth. Most fell somewhere in between, expressing complicated feelings about a complicated situation. She was particularly moved by a letter from a young woman named Emma, a university student studying history. Emma wrote that she had grown up believing the crown jewels were untouchable symbols of national heritage. Learning the truth had been devastating but also liberating. Now she understood that institutions were made by people, and people were capable of both greatness and terrible mistakes. The lesson, Emma wrote, was not that the monarchy should be abolished but that all institutions needed constant vigilance from citizens who cared enough to demand accountability. Camilla kept Emma's letter on her bedside table. She read it every morning during the week of waiting. It reminded her of why she had taken such enormous risks. The monarchy was not just buildings and jewels and ceremonies. It was an idea, a promise, a relationship between the royal family and the people they served. That relationship had been betrayed by decades of deception. Camilla had forced a reckoning because she believed the relationship could be healed if the truth were acknowledged. Whether her belief was right remained to be seen. The day of the ruling arrived with ominous clouds hanging over London. Camilla returned to the courthouse, following the same route she had taken a week earlier. The crowds were even larger now, the tension more palpable. This was the moment of truth, not just for one woman but for the entire institution she represented. She took her seat in the courtroom and waited. The judge entered. The room fell silent. He arranged his papers carefully, taking his time, understanding the weight of what he was about to say. Then, he began to speak. He acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the case. He reviewed the evidence that had been presented. He discussed the legal principles at stake, the tension between rule of law and the circumstances that might justify exceptions to strict application of rules. He noted that Camilla had undeniably broken laws. The smuggling had occurred. The customs regulations had been violated. The actions were criminal regardless of the motivations behind them. But, he also noted the context. The items in question were not ordinary stolen property. They were pieces of national heritage that had been illicitly removed from their rightful place decades earlier. Camilla had not been enriching herself but attempting to restore what had been taken. Her methods were illegal, but her goals aligned with the public interest. The judge referenced legal precedents that allowed for consideration of circumstances in sentencing. He discussed the difference between technical guilt and moral culpability. He acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the situation, the institutional failures that had created it, and the public benefit that had ultimately resulted from Camilla's actions. Then, he delivered his ruling. Camilla was found guilty on all counts. The law was clear. Her actions met the definitions of the crimes charged. There could be no acquittal without ignoring the evidence. But, the sentence would reflect the unique circumstances. Instead of prison time, Camilla would receive a suspended sentence. She would perform community service focused on cultural heritage preservation. She would be prohibited from holding formal royal positions for 5 years. She would remain legally under restriction but practically free. The courtroom erupted. Some celebrated the leniency as justice. Others condemned it as privilege protecting its own. The judge called for order, but the emotion was too intense to contain. Journalists rushed to file their stories. Lawyers conferred in urgent whispers. The verdict was historic, and everyone knew it. Camilla sat still amid the chaos, absorbing what had just happened. She was a convicted criminal. That would follow her forever. But, she would not go to prison. She would not be separated from her husband and the life she had built. She had paid a price, but it was a price she could bear. More importantly, the ruling had validated something essential. The judge had acknowledged that her motivations mattered. He had recognized the moral dimension of what she had done. He had treated her as someone who had acted wrongly for right reasons, not as a common criminal seeking personal gain. That acknowledgement meant more to Camilla than freedom itself. Outside the courthouse, she faced the cameras for the first time since the scandal began. She did not celebrate the verdict. She did not claim vindication. Instead, she spoke quietly about the responsibility she felt, the mistakes she had made, and the hope she carried for the future. She said she accepted the judgment of the court and would fulfill every requirement of her sentence. She said she remained committed to the monarchy and to the British people. She said she hoped that the painful process of the past months would lead to genuine renewal. Then, she asked for privacy as she and her family began the long work of healing. The cameras captured her walking away, a woman diminished and elevated at the same time. A queen who had broken the law. A citizen who had forced accountability. A wife who had nearly destroyed her marriage in service of something she believed was greater than herself. The verdict would be debated for years. Some would call it too lenient. Others would call it appropriate to the circumstances. Historians would analyze it as a turning point in the relationship between the British public and their monarchy. But, on that grey London afternoon, all that mattered was that one phase of the crisis had ended. The reckoning was far from over. The reforms were still in progress. The damage to public trust was still being assessed. But, at least one question had been answered. Camilla would remain free to participate in whatever came next. The days following the verdict brought a different kind of challenge. Camilla returned to something resembling normal life, but normal had changed beyond recognition. She was no longer a serving member of the royal family. Her official duties had been suspended. Her public appearances were restricted by the terms of her sentence. She found herself in a strange limbo, married to the king but barred from queenly functions. She lived at Clarence House but rarely appeared at Buckingham Palace. She was present but invisible, part of the family but separated from its public face. Charles visited when his schedule allowed, which was less often than either of them wished. The demands of the crisis had intensified his workload. He was constantly meeting with advisors, addressing Parliament, appearing before the public to reassure them that the monarchy was stable. Every moment was consumed by the effort to steady a ship that Camilla's actions had deliberately rocked. Their conversations were tender but strained. They loved each other still, but love was not enough to bridge the gap that had opened between them. Camilla had kept secrets. She had acted without consultation. She had made choices that affected both their lives without giving Charles a voice. He understood her reasons. He even agreed with many of them. But understanding was not the same as forgetting. The wound to their partnership would take time to heal. Camilla spent much of her restricted time writing. She had never considered herself a writer, but the events of the past months demanded expression. She began with journal entries, private reflections on what had happened and why. The entries grew longer and more detailed as she worked through her memories and emotions. She wrote about Sarah Chen, the woman whose letter had started everything. She imagined Sarah's decades of silent guilt, the burden of carrying a secret that could never be shared. She wondered if Sarah had found peace in her final days, knowing that the truth would finally emerge. She wrote about the crown jewels themselves, those glittering symbols that had captivated her since childhood. She remembered visiting the Tower of London as a young girl, pressing her nose against the glass, marveling at the sparkle of diamonds and the glow of gold. She had never imagined that one day she would be the one to expose their tarnished history. She wrote about Charles, the man she had loved for most of her adult life. Their relationship had survived so many storms before this one. They had weathered Diana. They had weathered public hatred. They had weathered years of waiting and wondering whether they would ever be allowed to be together officially. Now they faced their greatest test. Camilla believed they would survive this too, eventually. But she also knew that some damage could never be fully repaired. There would always be a shadow between them, a memory of the time she had chosen the monarchy over their marriage. She wrote about William and Kate, the future king and queen. She had watched them handle the crisis with grace and maturity. William's visit to the airport, his willingness to listen and understand, had touched her deeply. She hoped that their relationship could continue to improve as the family moved forward together. She wrote about Harry, the prince who had left it all behind. His departure had seemed like betrayal at the time, but the scandal had given Camilla new perspective. Maybe Harry had seen clearly what others had refused to acknowledge. Maybe his exit had been an early warning that the institution needed fundamental change. She wrote about the British public, the millions of people who had followed the scandal with such intensity. They were the true stakeholders in this drama. Their trust had been betrayed. Their treasures had been compromised. Their monarchy had lied to them for decades. Camilla felt the weight of their disappointment more heavily than any legal punishment. The court had given her a suspended sentence, but the court of public opinion would take much longer to deliver its verdict. As weeks passed, the acute phase of the crisis began to fade. The daily headlines about the scandal decreased in frequency. Other news demanded attention. The world continued to spin, and the British public, resilient as always, began to adapt to the new reality. But adaptation did not mean forgetting. The reforms Charles had promised were being implemented. Financial transparency was being established. Independent auditors were reviewing decades of records. The culture of secrecy that had enabled the jewel fraud was being systematically dismantled. The process was slow and sometimes painful. Old loyalties were strained as longtime servants of the household faced difficult questions about what they had known and when. Some resigned rather than submit to scrutiny. Others cooperated fully, grateful for the chance to clear their consciences. The investigation into the original fraud continued as well. Prosecutors were building cases against several individuals who had been involved in the scheme decades earlier. Most were elderly now, some in poor health, some already passed away. The prospect of trials and convictions seemed less important than the truth itself. But one potential defendant remained controversial. The documents Camilla had discovered pointed toward authorization from the highest levels of the royal household. The correspondence Sarah Chen had preserved suggested that someone with genuine authority had approved the scheme. The question of who that someone was had been carefully avoided in public discussions. Everyone knew who the evidence pointed toward. But speaking that name felt like a step too far. The person in question was long dead, beyond earthly judgment. Pursuing the matter further would mean publicly condemning a figure who remained beloved by many. It would mean tarnishing a legacy that had helped sustain the monarchy through difficult times. The decision about whether to make explicit what everyone suspected fell ultimately to Charles. He agonized over it for weeks. On one hand, the commitment to transparency he had made seemed to demand full disclosure. If someone in his family had authorized crimes, that truth deserved to be acknowledged. Healing could not be built on continued suppression of facts. On the other hand, what purpose would explicit condemnation serve? The person was dead. The crimes had been exposed. The system that enabled them was being reformed. Dragging a revered name through further mud might satisfy some hunger for accountability but would cause additional pain without achieving additional justice. Charles chose a middle path. In a carefully worded statement, he acknowledged that the evidence suggested authorization from senior members of the royal household during the relevant period. He did not name names, but he also did not deny the obvious conclusions that investigators had reached. He expressed sorrow that such decisions had been made and promised that similar abuse of position would never be tolerated again. The statement was criticized by some as insufficient. They wanted explicit accountability, names spoken aloud, reputations formally destroyed. They felt the monarchy was still protecting its own. But others felt the statement struck the right balance. The truth was acknowledged without unnecessary cruelty. The past was confronted without making it an obstacle to the future. The monarchy was taking responsibility without wallowing in self-flagellation. Camilla watched all of this unfold from her position of restricted semi-exile. She was proud of Charles for the choices he had made. He had risen to the occasion in ways she had hoped but not expected. He had shown that the monarchy could change, could grow, could face its shadows and emerge stronger. She was also aware that her own role in forcing these changes would never be fully celebrated. Some would always see her as a criminal. Some would always believe she had acted from selfish motives. Some would never forgive her for the turmoil she had caused, regardless of the good that came from it. Camilla accepted this. She had not forced the scandal to be loved. She had forced it because it was necessary. The rewards for necessary actions are not always gratitude. Sometimes they are simply the knowledge that the right thing was done. In the quiet evenings at Clarence's house, Camilla allowed herself to imagine the future. She imagined a monarchy that had truly learned from this crisis. She imagined a relationship between the crown and the people built on genuine trust rather than blind tradition. She imagined her husband's reign as a turning point, the moment when the institution evolved into something worthy of the modern age. She also imagined her own path forward. The restrictions of her sentence would eventually end. The public anger would eventually cool. Perhaps there would come a day when she could resume some role in royal life, when the title of queen consort would carry meaning again. Or perhaps not. Perhaps she would remain forever marked by what she had done. Perhaps her legacy would be the scandal itself, the crime she committed in service of truth, the punishment she accepted with dignity. Either way, Camilla knew she could live with the outcome. She had done what she believed was right. She had faced the consequences without flinching. She had given everything she had to force an institution she loved to become better than it was. That was enough. That would have to be enough. The crisis was not over. The healing was not complete. The future remained uncertain. But, in the quiet of the evening, watching the sun set over London, Camilla felt something like peace. She had started a fire that burned down old lies. Now she would watch to see what grew from the ashes. The seasons turned in London, and, with them, the rhythm of the scandal shifted from crisis to something more like chronic illness. The acute emergency had passed, but the wound to public trust remained open, refusing to heal as quickly as anyone hoped. Summer gave way to autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter, and still the questions lingered like morning fog that would not lift. Camilla fulfilled the requirements of her sentence with quiet determination. She visited museums and galleries, speaking with curators and conservation experts about the importance of cultural preservation. She met with students studying art history, sharing her own complicated perspective on the relationship between institutions and the treasures they guard. She became, in an unexpected way, an advocate for exactly the kind of transparency she had forced upon the monarchy. The community service was designed to be punitive, but Camilla found meaning in it. She discovered a genuine passion for the work. The people she met in museums and archives were dedicated professionals who cared deeply about preserving history for future generations. They had spent their careers fighting budget cuts and public indifference. They welcomed someone with Camilla's profile drawing attention to their cause. At the Victoria and Albert Museum, she helped launch a new initiative to digitize fragile historical documents. At the British Museum, she contributed to a program teaching conservation techniques to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. At smaller institutions across the country, she provided the kind of publicity that money could not buy. The irony was not lost on observers. A woman convicted of crimes involving cultural artifacts was now championing their protection. Critics called it hypocrisy. Supporters called it redemption. Camilla called it simply doing what needed to be done. Charles watched his wife's transformation with complicated emotions. He was proud of how she had handled her sentence. She had not complained or sought sympathy. She had not hidden from public view. She had faced the consequences of her actions with the same determination she had shown in causing them. But he also missed her presence beside him in the official duties of kingship. State dinners felt incomplete without her at his side. Foreign visits lacked her diplomatic instincts. The daily work of representing the crown was lonelier than